I'm Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitri College, Delhi University, and today's lecture is part of the ongoing series on English poetry. The lecture is titled African American Feminist Poet Audre Lorde. Now you see, as students of literature or as literature enthusiasts, I'm sure that poetry is something that appeals to everyone, appeals to us all, even if whether we might have gotten formal training in literature or not. But poetry is something that everybody relates to, right? And so when you look up poets, there are of course numerous poets that have written across the world at different points of time in history. But in this lecture series, we are covering poets of the 20th century, in particularly English poets. And by English poets, we mean that all those poets who wrote originally in English and may not necessarily have to be from England per se, but their primary language of expression was English. So today we are going to look at the work of a very interesting poet, that is Audre Lorde. I'm sure for those of you who are even a bit aware of the African American literature, you would have come across her name because she's one of the seminal poets of the 20th century. So now Audre Geraldine Lorde was actually born in February 18, 1934 and was around until 1992, which is from the early 20th century till the late 20th century, from the early 21st century till the late 21st century, which is 1992. So she was an American writer, poet, professor, an intersectional feminist, and also a civil rights activist. Now I know that all these words, even though they are adjectives used for Audre Lorde, the poet, but each word has some significance. For example, we are calling her an intersectional feminist. We're also calling her a civil rights activist. So what do these terms mean in connection with the poet is also something that we're going to discuss as we go along and get to know more about the poet, her writing style, and also her work as well. Right now, she was also she in fact described herself, and I quote, as black, queer, feminist, socialist, mother, warrior, poet, unquote. So you see, these are very strong words, each a very loaded word which she uses to describe herself. Black, of course, because because of her ancestry, that even as she was living in America, she was born in the US, but her ancestors were from the West Indies, were from the Caribbean islands, right? So that with that ancestry, her race, referring to her race with a sense of pride, she calls herself black. Queer, again, is a reference to her sexuality, which is unconventional, which is, as we all understand, and feminist, defines her ideological position, that she believes in the equality for the genders, right? All the genders, be it male, female, or the third gender. Socialist, she believed in a kind of a society which had equal opportunity for all sections, be it the classes, be it the different communities, etc. So we see that how equality or an equal treatment was constantly her mode of concern when she was writing. Of course, a mother, a warrior, and a poet. In fact, these words, mother, warrior, and poet, when they are put together, immediately they make you, sit up and take note. And that is actually the power of this poet, that she actually, moves people, shakes people out of their complacency, out of their comfort, to actually face the difficult reality, because she asks difficult questions and addresses those concerns through her writings. So that's the very initial introduction of this poet Audre Lorde, who is an African American feminist poet. Now, as I just mentioned, that Lorde was born to parents who had migrated to New York City from the Caribbean. So even as she grew up in this place called Harlem in New York, but she traces her ancestry to the Caribbean. And as a child, Lorde struggled with communication. She had difficult, relationship with her mother, which was not very warm, not very, cordial. In fact, what a lot of critics say is that her mother's was a kind of a tough love. So she never really had that conventional equation with her mother. So growing up, she struggled with communication, and therefore came to appreciate the power of poetry as a form of expression. And this is something which is very interesting, that for somebody who found it difficult to express herself, but poetry seemed to be, or appeared to be, a fit medium for her to share her thoughts and ideas, right? So that's how it is believed, one school of thought believes, that Audre Lorde actually turned to poetry. Now, if you see on your screens, this is Audre Lorde's picture, and as we said, that she was born in 1934, which is early 20th century, and was around till 1992, right? Now, if we talk about her education, and she received her education at a university in Mexico, and later she went on to study at this very famous university called the City University of New York, and Columbia University, where she obtained her master's degree in 1961. Now, even as she kind of majored in the discipline of library sciences, but and in fact she also worked for some part of her life in the library, but but she also goes on to teach at the university eventually, and of course was a prolific writer, poet as well. So 1961 is the year when she completed her master's, which is just the middle of the 20th century. Now, in 1968, she was a writer in residence at Tagaloo College in Mississippi, which is again a state in the US, and these were the formative experience. These were the formative years for her experience as an artist. Her book of poems, titled "Cables to Rage," actually came out of her time and experiences at Tagaloo when she was, a writer in residence. Now, from 1972 to 1987, she resided on Staten Island, which is, very close to New York City. In addition to writing and teaching, here she co-founded the Kitchen Table Women of Color Press. Now, what was this? Now, this was a press that she had set up, which would give a platform or an opportunity for the women of color to express themselves, to have their works published through this press. Now, what do we mean by women of color? I'm sure that a lot of you would have already come across this phrase before, but women of color involves all those women who are non-white. Maybe they might be from Asia, India, those who trace their ancestry to the Caribbean or Africa, So essentially all non-white women were referred to as women of color, and in fact this is a phrase which is very, very popular in the West, right? So that's why she called her press the kitchen table, a women of color press, right? So we see that she was doing important work in the field of arts, so that there were platforms available for women to express themselves freely, which up until then were not available to them, right? Now, having looked at broadly the decades and how they engaged Audre Lorde, let us also look at the academic environment. Now, you see, this is very important for us to understand, because what was the intellectual or the academic environment when she was active, right? When she was either teaching at the university, or she was herself studying. What was that environment like? Now, the first thing that we say is that actually she, while teaching at the City University of New York, which we just now mentioned, she actually fought for the creation of a Black Studies department. Now, you see, this is a very, very important political move, because up until then, literature of that was written by people of African origin perhaps was not taken as seriously. So when it is brought into formal instruction, there are departments set up for such writings, then automatically what happens? There is research that is done, more people are exposed to such literature, right? So essentially this becomes one of the ways to make this available, make such writings available, and not just make them available, but also to bring them into the mainstream discussions in academia. So that was one of her very important contributions, that is the creation of a Black Studies department. Now, you see, you might also with this wonder that at a time when she herself was teaching, she would have faced or she would have realized this kind of a gap that had existed, that there was no space for research and serious engagement with literature written by the African Americans or people with African ancestry. So she took it upon herself to then set up or actually fight for the creation of such a department at the City University of New York. Now, remember, taking you back to what we had said in the beginning of the lecture, that how Audre Lorde was also a civil rights activist. So all these measures that she took were actually ways for her to ascertain, to ensure rights to these people, to the Black people, that otherwise were not available to them in a country that was primarily white, right? And then the second thing that we say about the academic or the intellectual environment was that as a queer Black woman, she was an outsider in a white male dominated field. So this is another thing that we see her constantly refer to or mention in her writings, that she felt always like an outsider. Why? A, because of her sexuality, which was queer, and also because of her ethnicity, that is, she was Black, and also because of her gender, that she was woman. So you see three accounts or three reasons for why she felt as an outsider. So this automatically tells you, I'm sure that by now you would have realized that what a dense and a very, very relevant poet Audre Lorde is, and what kind of layers that one may find in her poetry, where she is coming from a very unconventional sexuality, of course a gender which is which has had a history of being marginalized, and of course an ethnicity that also was not in the mainstream, right? And then the third thing that we say about the academic environment at the time was that new fields such as African American studies and women's studies became much discussed back then. So that is the time when they were really emerging and becoming important points of discussion: African American studies and women's studies, right? Now, in this academic environment, Audre Lorde was inspired to not only write poetry, but also essays and articles about queer, feminist and African American studies. So this is the intellectual climate in which Lorde was writing, and which then also impacted or influenced the work that she did, and which today we're also going to take a look at briefly, that what is it, or what are some of the central concerns that we see Lorde exploring in her poetry. Now, you see, the other thing that we say is that Lorde was not only a seminal poet who was popular in the United States. In fact, her impact actually crossed borders as well. She had a very, very important role to play in the Afro-German movement as well. So she had a very, very decisive impact in Germany as well. So in 1984, Lorde started a visiting professorship in West Berlin at the Free University of Berlin, and became an influential part of the then nascent Afro-German movement. Now you see, that was a time when the Afro-German movement was just coming into being. That is, people who were who traced their ancestry to Africa, but also had a German connection. So just like there's the African American, likewise its German variant was Afro-German movement. And around in 1984, when Lorde actually had a visiting professorship in Berlin, she contributed immensely to this movement, which was then just coming into being. So you see, together with a group of black women activists in Berlin, Audre Lorde also coined the term Afro-German. So, and this was in 1984, and consequently she gave rise to the black movement in Germany as well. Now, the term Afro-German, not many of you would have heard of it, because of course we are not really exposed to a lot of literature from Germany. But yes, well, now we know that through Audre Lorde that there is a section of writers and poets from Germany as well, who are referred to by the term Afro-Germans, who then wrote about the concerns of people with this particular history, right? And this then gave rise to the black movement in Germany. Now, I'm sure you would have come across references to black movement or the Harlem Renaissance or the black arts movement in the context of the United States, right? So a similar movement is what came into being in Germany. So just, we will be digressing if we talk too much about these movements, but just to give you a sense that these movements were, meant to rally for the rights, representation, adequate, space and expression of the black people's experience, and most importantly, to accord a kind of dignity to them and their experience and their lives, which otherwise was missing, right? So these movements then, were centered around this idea, and they experimented with different forms of expression in art and culture in order to bring home this point, right? Now, the other thing, now you see, we've seen so far the intellectual climate, the academic environment which had shaped Lorde. Then we also saw that how her her influence goes even beyond US into Germany. And next we will see that when you read her works, one notices a diverse selfhood in her poetry and even in her prose. You see, she talks about difference a lot, and in her discussion of difference, she talks not only about differences between different groups of women, but even between conflicting differences within the individual self as well. You see, being an intersectional feminist, which means what? That she talks about the rights and representation of women and other genders across different communities and ethnicities. And this kind of feminism was a question to white feminism, which had only focused on experience of white women. But people like Audre Lorde, and of course the others as well, they talked about the fact that we need to also factor in these differences, which that is the difference of ethnicity, class, social standing, etc., while thinking about the difference of gender, right? So that's why we say that being an intersectional feminist, she talked a lot about differences, but these are only external differences. But what she also talked about was the conflicting differences within the individual as well, right? And let us look at this quote here by Lorde, which then will give us a sense of her cause and what is the kind of thought that actually informed her writings and all that she did in art and culture. And I quote, she says, "Yet, without community, there is certainly no liberation, no future, only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between me and my oppression." Unquote. Now, what's the point that she is making? Now, you see, just a while ago we said that she discusses and emphasizes on difference, right? But at the same time, she is a firm believer in a sense of community, in collectivism, right? She says that without community, there is certainly no liberation, no future, right? And if we are to make a difference in all these sections, in all these spheres, we need to get together, right? Otherwise, there's only going to be a temporary, what she calls a temporary armistice or a temporary peace between me and my oppression. By me, she means she does not mean just her own self, but the others like her own self as well, right? So in this lecture, we've looked at length, at the background or at the concerns which are important for for understanding Audre Lorde's works. So we looked at how she's a transsectional feminist, queer, a black woman, right? She was writing in the 20th century, lived most of her time in New York, participated in civil rights movements, even did some seminal work to bring about these measures for establishing an equal ground for not only different genders but also people from different sections as well, right? This, along with the intellectual background and certain social concerns, is what we discussed in this lecture. Now, in the next lecture, we are going to look at one of the poems and also a bit about what all works did she write at which point of time. Thank you.